What makes a Māori Māori? Such a simple question, but at times a really touchy subject.
I was always fascinated with the notion of identity.
Hannah O'Regan, well-known champion of language revitalisation and Māori education. She's written a book about Māori identity.
Probably because of my own experiences growing up the way I did, looking the way I do, having a really strong sense of being Māori and being ngaitahu, and then learning really early on that the way that I felt, the way that I saw myself, was not the way that the rest of the world saw myself.
Te Kaweho Hoskins. She's the Māori Pro Vice-Chancellor at the University of Auckland.
Growing up in my little street in Whangarei was a half-caste. Everyone knew it, everybody said it, and it was used by Māori against me negatively because I identified strongly with being Māori. Yeah. So it was a sort of weapon against me. Yeah, on that side, and then on the other side, you know, the obvious kind of, we're not sure really what you are.
Half-caste. Yep, I got that one growing up in Invercargill.
So I went to Kuinu Wikitoria, Māori boarding school in Auckland, and I think that was probably the first time I heard it. You know, you turn up and, sure, I'm the whitest person at the school, and people are saying, well, like, are you Māori? I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm ngaitahu. And I said, well, who are they? I've never heard of them before. I said, oh, we're from the South Island, from Te Waiponamu. I'm like, oh, but there are no Māoris in the South Island. At that same time, ngaitahu were coming to the fore in terms of our battle with the claim. There was Muldoon on TV calling, you know, my father an apprentice Māori or a quarter caste or whatever the terminology or the put-downs were becoming quite public. Your identity as Māori was determined by the power culture and the coloniser. Only colonised people have to prove their right to belong.
Courageous and tenacious.
Tahu Kukutai is a professor of demography at Te Ngira, Institute for Population Research at the University of Waikato. Was blood quantum a thing here?
Blood quantum was encoded into the census classification. Initially it was kind of like half-caste, we were half-caste, and there was a lot of angst about, oh, where do we count those who are half Māori and half European? So those that were more than half got counted with the Māori population, those that were less than half got counted with the European population, and those who were exactly half, which is a fiction, and there was no such thing, of course, could be counted with the Māori or the European population, depending on the way that they lived. So if they lived like a Māori in a collective fashion, then they got counted as Māori. If they lived like a Pākehā, presumably in a sort of individualised sort of like abodes, and not living with other Māori, then they got counted with the Pākehā population. That blood quantum classification expanded out into 1/4 and 3/4, and then there was a special census report in the 1950s in Auckland. I think it was focused on tamariki, and they had the crazy blood quantum measures trying to classify the population by something like 1/16. So I went real nuts. But Māori never really accepted this as a legitimate way of classifying who we were.
Have you ever had anyone ask, how much Māori blood have you got? Yep. What percentage?
Yep, definitely. I mean, I don't think people ask that now. I think they want to ask it.
So then it was, oh, they might have whakapapa, they might, you know, have ancestors, but they're not real Māori. This is what a real Māori looks like. These are the criteria to be a real Māori. And if you didn't fit the mould, you didn't fit the criteria list, then you were considered to be less, not real, not authentic, and therefore not deserved of the same treatment or respect.
If it's a sensitive issue here in Aotearoa, it's even more complicated for our Indigenous whanaunga in North America.
Well, you have the breakdown, first of all, how the government recognizes the Native people. You have status Indians, which are people who are enrolled with their own particular band or community, which then is enrolled with the federal government. So it's basically the government recognizes you as being Indigenous.
Drew Hayden Taylor, he's a Anishinaabe, an Indigenous Canadian author, playwright and documentary maker.
Then you have non-status people who are biologically Native, who are not recognized by the government or don't have a particular community that recognizes them. And then you have Métis, which are separate people who are a mixture of usually Cree, Scottish, and French, and have their own language and culture. Then you have the Inuit.
It's a lot to get your head around.
And then beyond that, as part of the dominant culture's attempt to absorb and Canadianize Indigenous people, there were several programs initiated to eliminate Indigenous culture. People who were adopted or went to residential school who basically were removed from their culture.
That trauma and disconnect is very real. And so too are the lengths others will go to claim heritage.
You have people who have some Indigenous blood way back when, and...
This way back when is the bit that fascinates me.
Yes.
So the way back when, my understanding is that some people do DNA tests.
And they claim to be Métis, or they claim some sort of form of Indigenous heritage. And most of us go, you know, my grandfather's grandmother was Irish.
You have Irish links, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. But I would not show up at the Irish embassy saying, give me a job, right?
South of the border, Native Americans are much like us. They whakapapa to specific tribes who were independent nations. We have Te Aroa and Raukawa, for example. They have Kaiowā and Yakama. Settlers came, next minute iwi here are lumped together as Māori, and up there, Indian. Not a term settlers should be using. In 2018, Donald Trump weaponised identity.
Pocahontas, Elizabeth Warren.
I'm going to get one of those little kids. And in the middle of the debate, when she proclaims that she's of Indian heritage, because her mother said she has high cheekbones.
An arch critic of Trump, Senator Elizabeth Warren took a DNA test.
What do the facts say?
The facts suggest that you
absolutely have a Native American ancestor in your pedigree.
Neither the use of the name Pocahontas by Trump nor a DNA test by Warren went down well with iwi.
The problem with the DNA test is that it proves nothing of relevance to whether a person is a citizen of an Indian nation, a member of an Indian nation. It's irrelevant to what it means to be a Native American in this country. That's based on a legal definition. Certainly every tribe has that in common, that we have some legal basis for our citizenship that we determine consistent with federal treaties.
And what about here in New Zealand? Is there a place for DNA tests, Ancestry.com and the like, to determine who is Māori?
We probably first received one about 8-9 years ago. We didn't have a clue what we were reading, didn't understand it whatsoever.
Arapata Ruben is the head of the whakapapa unit at Te Runanga o Ngaitahu.
People have done, they've done their DNA tests, those ancestry ones and that. And one of them will come in and someone goes, oh, kia ora, my 6 cousins 3 times removed, blah, 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 blah. And I go, what the F does that mean?
He's heard a few humdingers in his time.
In some cases, in rare occasions, we've had people ring up saying, oh, I've got a flat nose, it's white, I'm dark, I've got Maori features, I've seen photos of them, that sort of stuff.
What's the criteria for someone to be identified as Ngāi Tahu?
I think the real question is, what's the criteria for someone to register with Turunanga or Ngāi Tahu? There's two separate things here. To register with Turunanga, you must be able to show blood descent from an 1848 kaumātua listed in the Blue Book. To say you're Ngāi Tahu, that means that you're Uri of Tahu Pōtaki himself.
That Blue Book by the Ngāi Tahu Census Committee contains the names of all Ngāi Tahu alive in 1848.
Yeah, so the problem with the DNA material is it doesn't tell us who the ancestor is.
Te Mairetau is an academic, a historian on oral traditions, tribal genealogies and Indigenous knowledge systems. He's also upoko of Ngai Tuahuriri, a hapu of Ngāi Tahu.
Our whakapapa unit's pretty rigorous. They will know whether you are Ngāi Tahu or not. They will find your identity and your birth certificates and the death certificates of your parents and grandparents, the marriages and all the rest of it. It's not something you can fake easily. And you shouldn't underestimate how much our ancestors wrote on whakapapa. This is one tribe obsessed with whakapapa.
So what makes a Māori Māori? There's much talk of race, ethnicity, even trans-ethnicity.
It means nothing. The tribe doesn't define itself by ethnicity. It defines itself by whakapapa. So in that sense, what we really are, I guess the closest equivalent in the Western world is we're a family group. You're either in or you're not.
Because it's always a challenging thing, you know, even in Māori, it's rude to ask somebody about their whakapapa. You do it as an insult. To say ko waikwe is really saying who the hell do you think you are.
You go anywhere, the first question, it might seem really rude in other cultures, is where are you from? And and it's a culturally embedded assumption that you're gonna respond in some way. And in a pepeha, it's your maunga and your awa, and then your hapu and your iwi and your whānau. And it's not a cultural interrogation, but it is a culturally understood way of what a proper way to situate yourself is.
And that's the thing about the Western world and New Zealanders. Act, party, they're obsessed with race. They're obsessed with ethnicity. And of course, the tribe doesn't define itself in those terms.
When you look around the world at the way that governments count and classify people under the broad banner of ethnicity, they use all kinds of criteria. They use blood quantum, they use mother tongue, they use language, they use race, they use skin colour. This is a social and political construct. And so there are multiple ways to construct our Māori identities. And to me, I think the most important thing is that we construct our identities for ourselves.
It's a challenging space because you've got to be ready for the challenge. But yeah, I've known people and I've actually worked with people who have claimed a whakapapa that hasn't been validated. And actually the opposite has happened, where they've tried to register through our whakapapa office and they aren't able to prove that connection.
Yeah, sadly we've had to remove 2 whānau, not through their own fault. When we're tracing back, we'll have say 3 generations back, the Ngāi Tahu parent, there's no birth certificate there, so we'll request that from DIA. The birth certificate comes back with the Ngāi Tahu parents and listed, but in brackets it has adopted.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Speaking of emotional, Terry Ryan. He was the tribal genealogist who set up tools to respond to thousands of people trying to identify their connections to Kaitahu.
Just with that whakapapa unit, Terry Ryan, was controversial kind of
It
episode?
was controversial. But he wasn't Ngaito.
Did
He
he?
put himself down as Ngaito,
Yeah,
and he wasn't.
and he was the head of the whakapapa unit.
Mhm.
And how did you guys resolve that?
Untidily.
And that's the thing. When doubt arises over those who are deeply loved and highly respected, it creates division, hurt.
Hello, my name is Sasheen Littlefeather.
We had state-sanctioned armed forces.
In Willowdale with native roots, I have always said very clearly.
What do all these artists have in common?
They've been called wannabes.
Identity thief, race shifter.
They have been called indigenous.
Oh, playing Indian is another one as well that we use.
Pretendians.
Pretendian, can you describe what that means to me?
It's used to describe people who are non-native, white, who for one reason or another have decided to take on the appearance and the history and the lineage of an indigenous person. So they pretend to be Indians, so they were called pretendians.
Are you aware of any people who've been passing themselves off as
Of course I am.
Ngaitahi? Really? It is a thing?
Oh, it's a thing. They're all around. They're everywhere, usually in the academic world. There's been a few passing them off. They're everywhere.
It's not fair when, as I say, when so many of our people have experienced such loss and have such hunger for that connection, that we have these people who are purporting to be something they're not.
It's not new in Canada. Around 100 years ago, Grey Owl became a globally recognised environmentalist who championed the benefits of trapping.
When he died, I think in 1936, the truth came out and it was discovered that he was from Hastings, England.
Real name? Archibald Stansfield Bellamy.
He said his mother was Scottish and his father was Apache. Now, as you may know, the Apache are nowhere near Canada. And the reason I say it has ramifications for today is many of the pretendians today are sort of revealed by having sort of vague or unfocused tribal lineage that they say they're from here, 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 or it changes from year to year, and people finally put it together, the fact that they're all over the place.
All over the place, but nowhere specific.
Yes, exactly. So today, within the last 10, 15 years, there's been this explosion of people. It seems to be they're mostly in the arts or academia, which is kind of odd. But I guess the first big story was an author named Joseph Boyden, who is the darling of the Canadian literary scene. He said he was from 6 different places or 6 different nations.
I have always said very clearly and carefully, a small part of me is Indigenous, but it's a big part of who I am.
A reporter spent time tracking his lineage and discovered he had absolutely no native blood in him whatsoever.
Buffy St. Marie.
Icon and artivist. 6 decades, 16 albums. Buffy St. Marie was a globally recognised inspirational and outspoken champion for Indigenous rights.
The Indians are in the worst state of poverty of any minority group in North America, not because we're stupid, not because we're poor slobs. It's because we've been mistreated.
For years, Buffy had claimed she was born on a Cree reservation in Canada. But in 2023, Buffy's whakapapa and backstory started to unravel.
My growing up mom, who was proud to be part Mi'kmaq, told me many things, including that I was adopted and that I was native.
Buffy was not adopted. She was a child of my grandfathers and my grandmothers. You know, I don't know how or when she started to create her story. But at this point, she's just raised in a Caucasian family.
I can say absolutely with 100% certainty that this is the original birth certificate. Beverly Jean Santa Maria was born in Stoneham, Massachusetts at New England Sanitarium and Hospital on February 20th, 1941. She was not born in Canada. And if anybody is saying otherwise, then they're misinformed, because this is proof.
Now in her 80s, Buffy was stripped of her Canadian State Honours and Music Industry Awards, given she wasn't actually Canadian.
To say to your parents, well, I'm not yours, after they raised you, and you're making up this fantasy story, is a way of saying to your own family that they are a fantasy.
For the family, it was always a bit of shock and awe about why she was doing this.
Allegations she wasn't Indigenous sent shockwaves inside Indigenous communities too. After the story broke, Buffy reworked hers. She switched to saying her indigeneity was authenticated, when as an adult, she was adopted into a Cree nation.
I also found a new family, a chosen family. And they took me in as an adult, in accordance with Cree law and traditions, and they claimed me as their own.
When you adopt somebody ceremonially, you are making a family member, you are making a kin member, but you are not making a citizen. You are not making a band member. And I think a lot of Indigenous people don't understand that. I can go into ceremony and adopt somebody as my sister or my brother. It doesn't make them a Dakota person.
Buffy still insists she's Indigenous, although admits she is lacking in detail.
And to those who question my truth, I say with love, I know who I am.
Fun fact, I once plucked up the courage to ask Buffy St. Marie to collab on one of my songs. We met while playing at a big Sami festival in Norway. Buffy declined, fair enough. But after those allegations came out, I thought, that was lucky. Anyway, my mates in Canada hooked me up with another artist, a great talent, incredible voice. I released my album in November 2024. And it was fabulous, until it wasn't. No mai ki te ao with Moana. We're back in 25, looking at the world around us through a Māori lens, connecting the dots across Aotearoa and beyond. The politics, the people, the stuff that affects our whānau. We're here for you. Challenging and celebrating as well. Every Monday night on Whakapapa Māori. This song is off an album I released last year. Meet Jenny Larson from Canada. One of 6 Indigenous guest artists on the album, singing in their native languages. An award-winning playwright, stunning vocalist, Cree, Ojibwe, French whakapapa.
I picked up a book by Nancy Red Star called Star Ancestors, and I read that book. And I have to say that the book really, really opened up my mind about the possibilities and how it's specifically connected to not only some of our prophecies, but also some of our teachings within our communities.
Jenny was fabulous until she wasn't. Around the album release date, a Canadian news story broke revealing Jenny has no whakapapa to any native community and that her claims of Indigenous ancestry were vague at best. I was shocked. I reached out to her. Jenny wrote to me. She apologised for the position she put me in, says she'll no longer engage in what she calls Indigenous arts practice, but remains committed to honouring her unnamed ancestors who she claims were silenced by secrets, whatever that means. All of it raises some very interesting questions.
So some people will claim a connection, and it might be generations back. Does that make them Ngāi Tahu?
What's a connection?
You know, there might be a grandparent on their deathbed who says, you know, we've got Māori in our family, but I didn't want to tell you about it. Then they go on a journey, and I suppose they're disconnected, either from their Māori side saying no.
Yeah, and they should stay disconnected.
It's pretty ruthless.
Te Maireto is an academic and historian. He specialises in oral traditions and tribal genealogies, whakapapa. He's also upoko of Ngai Tuahuriri, a hapu of Ngāi Tahu.
Well, you know, there's a custom around here that you honour your ancestors. And if those ancestors made a decision to go the other way, you just honour your ancestors. And you take responsibility for your ancestors. And actually those ancestors should be aware of their responsibility to the future generations. One of the kaupapa around this hapu is atawhai ki te tangata, or aroha ki te tangata. And look, we'll always be compassionate towards people, but I don't know what they really mean when they have a connection. What does it mean?
Tahu Kukutai says it's actually the dominant culture who have struggled the most with their identity. After using the term European for many years on census forms, the government popped in Pākehā in 1996.
That led to a big outcry of, you know, don't label me in that way, I don't want to be called that. And it's really interesting because a lot of effort has gone on to understanding or fixating, I would say, fixating on Māori identity. But actually, the problem identity, when you lift up the cover and look under the hood, is actually, what do we call the dominant group? How does a dominant group want to know itself?
European, New Zealand European, New Zealander? New Zealand, of course, is a name that originated in the Netherlands.
Increasingly, the term that does seem to resonate, depending on the age group though, and depending on which part of the motu you're looking at, is Pākehā, because it is a kupu that really locates people in place in the way that European and New Zealand European doesn't. But the problem is, will Pākehā accept that?
In Canada, something else a lot more problematic is going on.
Why do you think people want to be?
Oh.
Because, you know, there was a long time when it wasn't cool to be Indian.
I think there are three reasons why white people want to claim they're native. One of them is everybody likes to belong somewhere. That's why people join the army, they join gangs, they join the Boy Scouts, they join clubs. Everybody wants to belong with other people in some ways.
Drew Hayden Taylor is an Anishinaabe, an Indigenous Canadian author and playwright. His documentary looks at an emerging trend, people pretending to be Indigenous, pretend Indians, pretendians.
And let's face it, being native is exotic. It is interesting, and we're the underdogs. So let's, so that's one reason. The second is financial benefits.
And there you go. Tick the box as Indigenous, and well, there's the potential to access benefits set up to deal with historic injustice. From scholarships and grants, to highly paid roles in academia or the arts, to fishing rights. And as for that settler guilt, who wouldn't want to be on the Indigenous side? Arapata Ruben heads the whakapapa unit at Te Runanga o Ngāi Tahu.
What is the benefit for someone registering?
More sense of identity. Yeah, back in the 70s and 80s, they did have school grants. I was at primary school, and I used to say to some of my mates, I get paid to come to school. You know, I was quite proud of that. And knowing that they weren't. They want to register because university scholarship grants are coming around, or the $5 savings scheme is another good one. Yeah, a lot of them do that.
Dr. Paparangi Reid leads the Affirmative Action Program at the University of Auckland's Medical School, which seeks to increase the number of Māori and Pacifica health and medical practitioners.
You have to talk about your family history, your family whakapapa, your family tree, few generations, and you have to have that certified. So we prefer for Māori that it's certified by your runanga, your iwi, tribal authority.
Have you ever come across anybody that you suspect isn't actually Māori or Pacifica that's tried to enrol?
We have 3 challenges. The first one is Fijian Indian, people who want to claim Indigenous status from Fiji, and the university doesn't accept that Indo-Fijians are Indigenous Fijians. The second issue we have is Māori especially who have been, who've lost connection. Maybe there's an adoption somewhere along the line and they have to go through some sort of testimonial to engage with us about that. And we get a few of these and we do usually accept them. And the third thing that we have is the opposite challenge. People who actually have whakapapa but are not living it and are actually ashamed of it, who want to use the pathway for those benefits. And we have difficulty accepting people who are not proud about their whakapapa.
In Canada, it's academic roles that are particularly popular for those pretending to be Native, like in the case of Carrie Baressa.
My name's Morning Star Bear. Whew. I'm just going to say it, I'm emotional, so.
Baressa leads an Indigenous health research lab at the University of Saskatchewan, all while observing Indigenous ceremony and tradition.
We grew up in a really poor, disrupted family, and that was due to intergenerational trauma, and that caused addictions and violence and disruption.
It turned out that Baressa misappropriated and exploited the traumatic experience of Indigenous peoples to bolster her false claim of Métis identity. Eventually, she was outed.
Carolyn Tate is also a professor at the U of S. The Métis woman says she's worked with Baressa for more than a decade and always believed she was Indigenous, but she says recently some inconsistencies and changes in Baressa's story led her and her colleagues to investigate Baressa's genealogy. And they concluded Baressa was not Indigenous at all, finding all her ancestors came from Europe.
It's embarrassing to think that we were so gullible and naive.
But could it happen here? Te Kaweho Hoskins is the Māori Pro-Vice-Chancellor at the University of Auckland.
I wonder what processes or protocols you have in place at this university to protect roles that are specifically designed for Māori.
To date, nothing that actually requires staff to prove their ethnicity. You know, how do Māori feel about prove your ethnicity, write your whakapapa here and get someone to sign it off? You know, it's kind of potentially insulting. The reality of our small size as a nation, our reference checking, the interview process, which sort of surfaces some of stuff about who people are and their cultural competencies and so on. Our networks, if we've got questions, don't worry, people are always saying, oh, are you interviewing so-and-so? No. So, this is our world. So I feel like it's not really a big problem here. We believe that if you have whakapapa, you have the right to apply for this pathway. It doesn't mean to say we measure how
essentially Māori you are. We understand that we have a history of colonisation and that some families have lost contact with their marae or whatever, but we affirm that if you have ancestry, if you have whakapapa, you have the right to apply for MAPAS. And part of our role is for those who have lost touch or lost cultural strength, to help rebuild that.
There was a case before the Waitangi Tribunal last year where people were passing themselves off as Waitaha, and you can pretty much get to grips with it straight away and who's faking it. And we did, and we knew they were telling lies because years ago we had outed this person's brother. And people do like to use Waitaha, but the trick within the tribe that you need to know and within Waitaha is where the same grouping, the genealogies and the whakapapa is the same. And there's choke points in those whakapapa where you can't get there without being ngaitohu. You just can't do it.
But in the States, it's not just individuals. There are some 250 groups reportedly claiming to be Cherokee tribes when they're not.
There is a group of white people in Georgia pretending to be a Cherokee tribe who prints their own Cherokee money and opened up their own Cherokee bank. They have no political or racial ties whatsoever to the Cherokee people.
Cherokees, they seem to be quite frequently impersonated, don't they?
Which is very odd because they're one of the most highly listed lineage-wise group of people. There are 3 Cherokee organizations that can track down by over 200 years who has been, who was and who is a Cherokee.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, it's not the tribe you want to fake.
Back here, why would anyone late in life want to connect to whakapapa they had just discovered?
I think what they really want is to experience life. So we live here and experience being us. So I'm just going down to my brother's to get some meals later on tonight. And Tuesday night he's going mutton birding. And there's been a whole bunch of activities around this village that is the experience of us.
Hannah O'Regan has written about Māori identity and what it means in principle and practice.
It's not about what I get out of being Māori. It's what do I give back? What do I do? You can have an affinity to other cultures and a deep passion and love and commitment to them. But that's different from being them. That's different from having that whakapapa. It's a legacy not only in terms of genealogy, but it's also a legacy in terms of those responsibilities I talk about. And if you feel something, you don't have necessarily those same expectations or the commitments. You've got the choice to leave it. You've got the choice to go somewhere else. Being Māori, you don't have that choice.
What are the consequences in Canada of thousands of non-Indigenous people ticking Indigenous in the census?
There was a census, say it might have been in 2011 and then 2018 or something. It looked like the disparities between Indian and non-Indian educational outcomes had completely closed. And they said it's because a whole bunch of people, 100,000 people, suddenly ticked the box that said, I'm Native.
All this leave very distorted statistics which undermine the effectiveness of public policy that targets, say, health inequities and education outcomes. So, for instance, you might start believing now in the East Coast that there is no gap between outcomes in education, that all of a sudden Indigenous people down on the East Coast are on equal terms.
The impact of that was that the government could go, oh, look, the disparity's been reduced. We don't need to put targeted funding towards Native schools or anything anymore.
This issue does have very specific ramifications for Indigenous people. It's not a victimless crime.
Well, you looked at patterns and trends in North America, right? What difference did you see there to here?
Oh, look, I think there's a really big difference between what you might call the pretendian phenomenon, which is people effectively fabricating Indigenous background to pass themselves off as Indigenous in order to gain, opportunities or to benefit themselves in some way. So that's one phenomenon, the pretendian phenomenon. And I think that is quite different from people changing how they self-identify in a context like the census, when there's no immediate intangible gain to be had from doing that.
Ko te mea tuatahi, e mihi kawana ki te mana whenua.
Professor Tahu Kukutai describes each national census as a snapshot in time. She's concerned, though, about what might happen now it's been canned and the job given to a host of different government agencies to collect, collate and analyse different data sets.
You need people who are real experts in the data, and they're not just taking the data at face value, but they actually understand what is going on underneath, and they understand the context, and they can bring meaning and nuance to their interpretation of the data, not just taking it at face value, because that can lead you down some really wrong-headed conclusions, and that has implications because resources get allocated elsewhere instead of in the places where they actually need to be.
Is there a difference between deception or delusion?
Well, there's always a few people that don't know how to be an ally. And they're uncomfortable with the responsibilities and the limitations of being an ally.
So once a whakapapa is confirmed, then what?
I think if you're whakapapa to the tribe, everyone has an equal right to whatever distributions. And it won't be too heavy, but the hapu will be saying, you've got a right to be here as well. But we want to know where you've made commitments.
I've seen it up home a couple of times, people coming into their identities very late and claiming political space. It doesn't last long because in the end they don't achieve much because they don't understand anything.
So we're not a tourist destination for you to come in and out, get your fill, leave. There's been some interesting assertions at our marae where people state who they are and their entitlements, but they don't last long because it's too hard.
What was the biggest thing you learnt when you were doing your documentary?
The pain. This is a serious issue, and there are people who are saying they're taking my voice. They're trying to replace me. They're going in. They're replacing me in all these organizations, and it hurts, and I want them gone.
The challenge for us is that while we're trying to address that subjugation, the effects of colonisation, to basically claw back some of what was taken from us. As they say, for the language, it takes one generation to kill a language, but it takes 3 generations to get it back. Now, if you think of that time, I think we need to be generous and give people the opportunity to do that reconnect, to go through that process. But I am worried that we might go too far the other way, where being Māori only becomes having the lineage